Have you heard? Marana has unforgettable festivals and events. From parades to fireworks, rodeo competitions to light shows, we'll show you a good time. Learn more about the Marana Signature Event Series by visiting maranaaz.gov/events.
Are you a high schooler looking for a way to give back to the community? Join the Marana Teen Advisory Group for your chance to plan fun events, create meaningful projects, and make your voice heard. Learn more and apply today at maranaaz.gov/mtag. Teen-driven, community-focused, future-ready.
Property crimes are often the result of opportunity. You can take action to help reduce crime by starting a Neighborhood Watch program. Neighborhood Watch serves as a guide for more eyes and ears in your neighborhood. Contact the Marana Police Department Community Resource Unit at 520-382-2055 for more information.
Welcome to Real Talk with the Town, where I sit down with Marana staff to answer your burning questions about our beautiful community. My name is Terry Rozema, and I'm the town manager for the town, so let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Real Talk with the Town. My name is Terry, and I am your host, and today we're talking money, budget, finance, and who better to have in the house than our finance director, Yiannis Kalaitzidis. Yiannis, is that what nationality is that?
Well, that would be Greek most of the days, except when you just pronounced it in a different language. But
I did?
I'm kidding, but you did very well. It's Yiannis Kalaitzidis.
And of course, our former finance director, a recovering finance director and deputy town manager now, Erik Montague. Erik, how you doing?
I'm doing quite well.
Good. So we got two people doing well, and we're going to do an icebreaker here. I'm always interested in people's origins. Like, at what point, because both of you got into numbers for a living, and I'm curious, at what point in life did you realize numbers are my thing, they're my jam, and I'm going to be doing finance, accounting, etc. for my life? Erik, start with you.
For me, it started in high school. Interestingly enough, I just wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to be when I grow up. So I decided, hey, there's this thing called accounting and finance. Let me try it. Took a couple of classes, and it ended up clicking for me.
All right. So Erik fell in love with numbers. Junior year, sophomore year, when was it?
Junior year in high school.
Junior year in high school. He knew his path was dealing with numbers, finance, accounting. Yiannis, how about you?
For me, it started when I was in elementary school, liking math, but then I really discovered accounting when I was in college. And it was a little bit of a mistake because I thought I was going to be a finance guy. I was going to go into investing and I was going to do all these wonderful things. And somehow I ended up liking accounting and liking auditing and everything that came with this world. So,
all right. So we have here, in terms of history with the town, as finance director consecutively, because Erik goes back all the way to 2006, Erik?
That is correct.
Yeah, he says he's going to have 20 years in October if he makes it.
That is true, Terry. If I make it to October 9th.
All right, October 9th, we're going to have a party, 20 years for Erik at the Town of Marana. The last 8 years in the town manager's office? 8 years, last 8 years?
Yeah, since 2018.
2018. And Yiannis took over as the finance director in 2018, taking over for Erik. So I think we got a pretty good breadth of experience here in the room to talk about finance, budget, how we do that. So kind of what prompted this, to be honest, is, just some information out in the community about the town's solvency, the town, how it goes about budgeting. And so I received some questions from folks about, is the town in a good place? Is the town in a bad place? Those kinds of things. So I thought, what better way to answer those questions than to have you two gentlemen on the show with us to kind of walk us through. So we just passed our most recent, the 2027 fiscal year budget. So, Yiannis, why don't you kind of take us through that budget process a minute?
certainly, and yes, we're very proud to have passed our budget. It is our first $500 million budget, about $560 million, and it is a pretty involved process. But I'm going to try to make it brief. Otherwise, we're going to prove that this podcast is actually going to be the cure for insomnia for people listening. Overall, really, though, we're starting with all the departments being involved. Every single person has an opportunity to have input through their departments in putting together our budget, putting our numbers together, looking at everybody outside of the town, the economists, the experts, what do they tell us, and then pulling that information together, getting direction from council, getting ideas from the departments of what's needed, what are the services that we want to deliver, what expanded services we might need, and at the end of the day, compiling all this information, making it available to the public through our processes, through our presentations, through our website, and welcoming comment whenever somebody comes to us, listening to people, and through that whole involved process, coming up with a responsible budget that has been structurally balanced for as long as I've been here and before my time. And really, when we talk about structurally balanced, we talk about living within our means. We talk about making sure that when we have a certain amount of money that we know we're bringing in, we're spending just that amount of money, and we don't spend more than that for our everyday needs. And many of those needs are really our payroll, our greatest investment that we have, because these are the people that actually provide all those services to all the residents from Marana.
Very good. So if you were to put an umbrella statement over how we approach budget, is there something that comes to mind for you in terms of are we loosey-goosey? Are we fiscally? I mean, what kind of mindset approach would you put? I know it's not loosey-goosey. I mean, but what is there anything that comes to mind for you in terms of a philosophical approach that the town takes?
It's a conservative approach, making reasonable use of taxpayer money. We are the ultimate fiduciaries. We try through our planning to make sure that we're never going to run too far, too fast. And we can justify the money that is being spent, and the money is being spent for a good purpose, for an appropriate purpose. So through all the years, we always look at what everybody does around us, and we take a step. We make sure that we're putting together numbers that will provide the most service for the best value for the money that we collect from taxpayers.
All right. So there's a term that we use around here quite a bit. I've heard you use it. I've heard Erik use it multiple times. I've since adopted it and used it multiple times as well. Structurally balanced budget. What does that mean, and why is that important, Erik?
So with the structurally balanced budget, we just want to make sure that the right expenditures are being paid for with the right revenue sources. In the case of government, you're going to have a number of revenue sources. Yiannis may talk about them a little bit more specifically, but in short, there's some that you're going to expect to get over and over again, year in, year out. And you want to make sure that those ongoing revenues that you anticipate match ongoing expenses like payroll, insurance, and other costs providing services to the community. We also get certain one-time revenues that you're only going to collect one time, and that's obviously why it's called one time, or you only expect them to be collected infrequently. And those might be like a permit revenue or an impact fee. You want to make sure that those one-time revenues, you match those to one-time costs. You don't want to mix and match, because then it would cause an imbalance.
It's a situation where your ongoing revenues are covering your ongoing expenses in one category or another. Is that fair?
That is true. That is fair. It's kind of like I kind of can make the comparison in a personal budget. You have the income that you get from your salary, and you pay for your mortgage and ongoing costs associated with utilities, etc. But if you went to your local Circle K and bought a scratcher ticket and won $500, that is a one-time revenue source that you wouldn't necessarily put as a down payment on a car and then have 6 years or 7 years worth of payments on. That's kind of sometimes how I'll compare it.
That's a great analogy. I appreciate that analogy. So let's talk a little bit about what some of the sources of revenue are for the town, and how consistent are those? How reliable are those? So let's walk through those. Let's talk first of all, probably the biggie. So it's probably half or more of our incoming ongoing revenue, and that is sales tax. So let's talk about sales tax. Is that a good source of revenue, a bad source of revenue? Is it consistent? Is it reliable? Yanni, talk to me.
Sales tax is a great source of revenue. It is something that is wonderful for a growing town like us. Marana has been growing consistently for a very long time, and it is a place that both residents and businesses like to move in. And as a result, the sales tax for the town has been growing. As a result, also, it has been a very consistent source of revenue for us and has been reliable, and it is reliable and responsive to the economy. Now, there's the good thing and the bad thing. It's responsive to the economy. So when the economy is good, the sales tax revenue is good. At the same time, if the economy were to turn down and actually take a dive a little bit, which has happened in the past, we can experience our revenues dropping off. And in those cases, that's where we always make sure to be prepared. That's where a structurally balanced budget puts us in a good position because we don't spend within our means. We have a strong savings account, we can call it our reserves, and we can actually weather those downturns in the economy.
So good point here, because there have been times when we're flying high and things are, great. When we first annexed Ina and Thornydale and Orange Grove, that whole area, all of a sudden we got this influx of sales tax coming into the town. That was before my time. But then, you have a time like the Great Recession. And I know, Yanni, you weren't here, but Erik, you were here. How in the world do you weather that when all of a sudden the economy crashes, sales tax crash, sales tax revenue falls? How do you handle that? And how can our residents be assured that, we've thought through this and we know how to get through these situations?
Yeah, that's a great question. The overall budget process, we come up with estimates and utilize our best information that's available to us at that time. But, no department shop at that time would have been able to anticipate something as drastic as the Great Recession. And for us, a key part of us weathering that storm, quite literally, had to do with us monitoring our budget on a consistent basis. And monthly and quarterly, we're watching feverishly over how the monies are coming in and tracking, and we're providing periodic updates to council about how things are doing. So part of it has to do with just kind of watching our overall revenue sources and try to notice when something is different. And in the case of the even though you couldn't project a Great Recession, you can see when you might be going into it, and you want to be on top of it to be able to provide information directly, not only to council for policy direction, but also to staff to be able to make adjustments that might need to happen in the current year. What allows you, in addition to responding to it as it's occurring as close to as when it's happening as possible, is to have sound reserves. And we've talked about them from time to time, but really, they're also called rainy day funds. And in the case of a Great Recession, we did have healthy reserves at the time. And what reserves allow you to do is to be able to temper that slowdown over multiple budget cycles, so you don't have to make a drastic change in any specific budget year. And in fact, for us, when it came to us managing through the Great Recession, it was all hands on deck, related to ideas on how we could weather that storm. And there were multiple levers that we pulled to be able to weather that storm. Some of it had to do with mid-year budget adjustments related to hiring freezes. We identified ways in which we can reposition the organization to come through that storm and be able to balance us for growth when we knew the day would come. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we monitored it closely, provided information to mayor and council and to the public, and healthy reserves allowed us to kind of temper those changes over time.
Yeah. And I would say, I wasn't here at the time, so I don't know if I can say with absolute certainty, but I think looking back, it's given us the benefit of hindsight and being able to say that we weathered that storm really, really well.
I believe that we did. You can look back and, they say hindsight is 20/20. Are there things we may have been able to do different? Perhaps. But the town manager at the time gave us a specific charge or responsibility or what our goal was. And our goal was to position the organization for success and growth as we rolled out of the Great Recession. So it was an extremely difficult time, not going to take away from that. We had our first, budget reductions and first layoffs that occurred. We actually reduced staff. We had what was called a worker reassignment program or plan, where we basically moved people throughout the organization. If there's a vacancy in one department, we moved them to another. But at the end of the day, we still had to say goodbye to some of our employees, those that are providing valuable service to our community. And that was excruciatingly difficult.
Yeah.
And in fact, I remember as finance director going into the council chambers, and somebody who was losing their job that night came and asked me and basically asked me why, as finance director at the time, why couldn't I budget for another $50,000 or $60,000 to save her job? That lives with me even to this day.
Yeah.
And what I let her know is I said, I apologize that you're being directly impacted by these budget changes that are happening. I will have a responsibility to bring forward a budget that meets council's objectives and the objectives that we've been given, and we believe we've done that. And I'm sorry for you losing your position, but we have an obligation to try to work our way through this, and it's part of it. But it doesn't take away from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think we carried that forward, that knowledge, even though I wasn't here, having the opportunity to have Erik still here. When we went through a similar situation, or we all thought to go through a similar situation with COVID coming on, those lessons were still with us.
Yeah.
So we reacted very fast. We didn't say, let's just keep spending, we have a budget, everything's going to be okay just because we have a reserve. Right away, as everything was rolling out, we all stopped. We talked to all the departments. Everybody, to their credit, was on board, talking, looking where we could save money, what could we delay as a purchase. And our first thought was, how do we continue to provide the services that our residents are used to? And then the next thought was, okay, now how do we make sure that we do this in an organized fashion? We all said, here's where we can cut. We sat, we coordinated with executive leadership, we coordinated with council, and we actually came back with a reduced budget. But at the same time that we were doing that, others around us had learned, and what ended up happening was we spent time and time again putting together very conservative budgets because everybody was saying, well, it's going down. This is not going to be good. And with the federal government coming in with 1 and then 2 and then 3 relief packages, quite the opposite happened. What ended up happening is there was an unprecedented amount of sales tax flowing in, not just for the town of Marana, but pretty much for everybody in the state of Arizona.
Yeah.
And that really changed everything for many of us and kept the economy humming, kept people going to stores, kept all the businesses that were in decent or good shape still to be available to have their doors open. And to this day, that has actually redefined some industries. Our hospitality industry, we have about the same number of hotel properties. But pre-COVID, just a few years ago, they were bringing in about $1.4 million. Now they've been consistently bringing in about $1.9 million for our bed tax fund. And that hasn't gone back. That hasn't reduced. And we are seeing that in many other areas of the economy. And I think that has a lot to do not just with us, not just with what we're doing in our office. And we do a lot. We actually pay a lot of attention when we put together our budgets. We look at what the state does, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. They put together estimates. They look at the Eller School of Management that put together estimates through their expert economists and their researchers. We look at what's happening globally. We look at what's happening locally. We go out and we actually walk the mall. We actually walk the areas where we have high concentration of businesses. And we pay attention to the businesses that are coming and going. And we have been very lucky. We are a growing town, and development, while not always to everybody's liking, development will keep happening because Marana is a desirable location. We have I-10, and through history, transportation and transportation corridors have allowed development to happen and have allowed communities to flourish. Whether it be the Roman roads thousands of years ago or the railroad coming through and still here with us. And now I-10, transportation is really what drives the economy. because it provides convenience, it provides the goods.
Yeah.
And that's where we are today. And I think our budgeting process takes all of that into account. I'm getting long-winded here.
No, you actually hit on what I was going to talk about next, and I really appreciate that, because I was going to say, if I said to you, Yanni, Erik, are you guys looking at our budget through rose-colored glasses and flying by the seat of your pants and just hoping against all hope that the economy is good so that we have good sales tax revenue? But you answered that, and you used the word, the town's been lucky. I will say, I don't think the town's been lucky. I know what you were saying, it's been lucky in regard to the kind of growth that we've had. We've been fortunate. I would say better word than lucky. But when it comes to budget, it seems to me that with the people sitting here in this room, specifically the two of you, overseeing the budget, putting, as your words, conservative fiscal principles into practice, we have consistently been one of the more solvent entities in Pima County, state of Arizona. I mean, do you have any sense of that, Erik?
So to answer that, I think it's not a matter of rose-colored glasses. We want to be realistic in our budgetary practices in both the revenue outlook and also expenses, because what we want to do is fulfill council's wishes in providing and maintaining those services. And if we're too conservative, we're going to hold back the organization in what it needs to be able to maintain levels of service, right? So if we're too optimistic, let's say some bright rosy red glasses, then we're going to project revenues way in front of our skis, and we're not going to collect those revenues. We may have to make mid-year adjustments, and we're not going to be able to weather that. If we're too conservative, then what would happen is then we wouldn't be able to budget for what may be needed for expenses to be able to support our public safety elements or parks and recreation or highways and streets, and then we would have monies that come into the coffers that we couldn't spend. So what we want to do is come up with, reasonable estimates that are realistic so that we can allocate the revenues that we anticipate to come in to maintain service levels. And I think that that's key. And if you look at us, not only in the region within Pima County, but within the state, we have been able to maintain those service levels and in some instances even enhance them in ways in which are meaningful to the public.
Yeah, 100%. You guys are both so stinking modest, man. It's crazy. You guys wouldn't do this. You wouldn't call yourself experts in the finance field because you're too humble to do that. So I'll call you experts. But two guys who've been doing this for a long time have positioned the town to be, I will say it, one of the most fiscally responsible, certainly in Pima County, probably in the entire state of Arizona, consistently winning an award to that effect. The name of that award always escapes me because it's like 10 words long, but who's going to help me out with the name of that award?
It's the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award Program that is awarded by the GFOA. And it's
GFOA. So for all those people who have no idea what that is,
GFOA is the Government Finance Officers Association. And it actually is not just something that is within the U.S. They have memberships in Canada and even in South Africa and a few other countries.
Okay, so a worldwide organization is looking at what we're doing and they're putting their stamp of approval on what we're doing. Is that sum it up in a nutshell? Saying, hey, you guys have good practices.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. That particular budget award is really the highest form of recognition, and what it recognizes is the organization's commitment to open and transparent budgeting practices. And there's a lot of detail that goes into that budget, and it's the highest level of recognition.
Okay, now we're humming, man. It takes me a lot to draw any kind of self-promoting. I know you're not self-promoting, but doggone it, you guys do a great job, and people need to know that. And we've won this award, I think, every year going back. Now, Erik started in 2006, and we first got it in 2007. So Erik's a bit of a slacker. He didn't get it for us his first year here, which I don't know. I mean, Erik, what the heck happened in that first year?
I guess I slept at the wheel.
Erik was asleep at the wheel in '06, but he came on strong in '07 and got that award for the town year after year in his position. And then Yiannis picked up the reins and has continued that since 2018, and we've got it every year since then as well.
And we are hoping to get our 20th anniversary with our latest budget, 27. So
Nice. Excellent. All right. So excellence in budgeting and finance. Let's talk a little bit about reserves because you guys have mentioned this several times. I'm not sure that everybody, the average person, maybe, I don't know, will know when we talk about general fund reserves, what that means. And let's talk about some of those numbers even because I think they're impressive from the standpoint that they give us strong stability and a good foundation. So, Erik, let's talk. You tell us what general fund reserves are, and then we'll jump over to Yiannis to talk a little bit about what the actual numbers have looked like over the last number of years.
General fund reserves, well, the general fund is the town's major fund, the largest fund that provides a majority of the central services that we provide. And in the case of reserves, I think a way that you could look at it, aside from just a numerical value, is what are called rainy day funds, or kind of a nest egg. And it's
Savings account.
Savings account.
Okay.
Correct. So basically, it's there are resources that are going to be available to you to basically, in the case of an economic cycle, to weather that storm. It could be in the position to be able to provide flexibility to make a significant investment for the community. It could be the acquisition of land. It could be the development of a major project or infusion related to a particular project or program from the council. But what reserves will do, back to that cash account, is really to provide flexibility to weather storms should they come in the economic cycle, to make major investments related to advancing the services that the council and citizens require. I think it's kind of from an overall
that's a beautiful explanation, well thought out and explained. Now, Yiannis, talk a little bit about what those numbers look like, because when I'm thinking about a savings account, I'm really happy, when I got a few $1,000 in the savings account, right? But we're not talking about a few thousands. We're not talking about thousands here, right? What are we talking about when we talk about our general fund reserve, our nest egg, as Erik said?
we're talking about millions. And in this particular instance, if we were to look at our numbers and if we were to look at some of those spreadsheets that we finance people love.
You do love your spreadsheets, man.
We do.
Yeah.
What we end up seeing is that we set our reserves to be defined based on our revenues. So we say we want our reserves to be, for the rainy day fund, 25% of our budgeted revenues in the general fund. Mm-hmm. Because that will allow us, if something were to go wrong, if the economy were to take a downturn, that would allow us to go from, if we equate what we do now running, it would equate us to just slow down, go to a walk instead of come to a full stop. That's what we try to do with the reserves.
Yeah.
And what those numbers are, what they used to be, let's say back in 2021, they're about half of what they are today. And so we went from about 12 million to almost 24 million in just a few years. And that is why I explained how we set those reserves, because that also reflects our revenue growth. Since that time, our revenues have also grown that much. We have gone quite high looking at our actual revenues. We've gone in our revenues for the general fund budgeting for about 45 million in 21 to budgeting about double now. We're budgeting about 93 million in our revenues. And having those reserves, making sure that we don't spend that money, being responsible with the money, having structurally balanced budgets, that is what we have been doing. So back to the previous conversation, to the previous comment of how do we budget, how do we spend the money, do we have rose-colored glasses on? I think all of that together comes together in looking at our reserves, in looking at our growth, in looking at our revenues. If we hadn't done all of those things, then we wouldn't actually be able to look at these reserves and say, no, we still have them. Yes, they're still available. And not only that, but on top of those reserves, we have been able to accumulate a pretty healthy balance. The additional money that Erik mentioned earlier from this savings account that we can also use for one-time projects. And that is what we're doing. We have this money, and we're planning to use it for one-time projects, for one-time needs. And I'll give an example.
Yeah.
I think one of the great needs that council under Mayor Ed Honey, our previous mayor, rest in peace, did is they decided to pay down and then pay off our pension liability for our public safety, for our police officers. That was over $20 million that was paid over the course of 2 years. And now there is no pension liability for that pension fund.
Which was costing us about, $1.5 million a year?
It was costing us an additional 1 to 1.1 million in
Okay.
interest payments.
There you go.
To maintain.
In interest.
Right.
So we saved ourselves 1.1 million a year in interest by using that rainy day fund to pay down that liability, pay off that liability, right? Yeah. So things like that, things like roadway projects, as Erik talked about. So you said, that fund has grown above, what that bottom line number that we set, right? So whether it's, I think in 2021, it was 12.2 million. This year, it was 23.4 million. But that number above and it is an indication of additional money that we've been able to put away, if you will, set aside for those kinds of projects. Can you talk a little bit about those numbers as well?
So those numbers have also grown, and a lot of it has to do with our revenues coming in much better than anticipated. We have grown a lot, and because we have managed to spend responsibly over the years without really holding back, we have been providing the services. We have provided
5-star service, buddy.
The 5-star service.
There
Yes,
you go.
You're correct. And our parks are top rate.
Yeah.
Our roads are in great condition. We continue to maintain them. On top of all of that, our revenues kept coming in, especially with COVID, and because we were very conservative, we built a pretty sizable balance. At the end of this year, in a few days, almost now, we're going to end the year. The numbers are going to come in a few weeks, and I think we're going to have an additional about $116 million that we will be able to spend on projects. That money, we've already planned to spend some of it in next year's budget. We have been in the building we're sitting in now for 20 years, and we have kept growing, and we're about to outgrow it, and we need to do something. So some of that money will be spent to remodel, to optimize, actually, more than remodel this building. So we
Space
can,
optimization.
So we can actually put more people in here, so we can employ and continue to provide those great services, those 5-star services. But beyond that, we're also planning to use that money for other needs. It's not just for us, it really is also for highways and streets that we're going to use that money, and for other needs that the community has and council decides to invest in.
And Terry, if I may kind of tag on to
Jump
that,
in.
for the listeners, as we've thrown out a couple pretty large numbers, and really what we're talking about is somewhere at the end of the current fiscal year that Yiannis mentioned where we'll end up is combined total is somewhere in the neighborhood of about pushing $140 million in total reserves, right? That is a significant mark for the organization. But council had the foresight years ago, almost 20 years ago now, to establish a policy, and we've talked about it, but I think it's important to highlight, and that is the required reserve, right?
Right.
So the $24 million number is the required reserve.
That's the number we don't want to go below.
Don't want to go below that. And in fact, that's one of the rating criteria that when we go to the market to issue formal debt to finance certain infrastructure that they look for is, our financial wherewithal. And they'll look at not only what our policy is, but have we been following it? And we have been following it for the better part of, 2 decades now. And I think it's important to let the listeners know that these reserves are significant, for our community, and they do provide for flexibility. And we have been maintaining compliance with the required reserve.
Yeah. So anything above that 23, it's like gravy. Is it gravy? Is it icing on the cake? What is it? What do you call it? Just helpful? I mean, you guys are so conservative with these things that you probably wouldn't call it icing on the cake.
I wouldn't call it that.
Okay.
But I would definitely call it that 5-course meal, basically, for
Okay.
one-time projects. It is something that's going to be very valuable. it is something that's going to be very needed. And I do want to throw one more thing here.
But it's not time to run out and buy jet skis, motorboats, and side by sides. Right, we're not going to get frivolous and silly with this additional money. It's exactly what you're about to say, I think.
It's not until at least the El Rio Preserve is a little bit bigger. Okay. We're not quite there yet. No, I wanted to actually add one more thing. What I wanted to add is we have these numbers here, and these are the numbers that are available to spend on projects. What doesn't show here is being conservative and having a good plan and having council support that plan also allows us to do other things. In addition to the money that we're talking about here, we also maintain a vehicle replacement reserve. Yes. We recognize that our police officers, our parks, our streets, all of those need these essential tools that they use day in and day out. And if there were a downturn in the economy, then we would sometimes be forced to say, oh, no, stop. You can't buy the tools that you absolutely need to do your job. And we've planned for that because of something that Erik did when he was here going to council and establishing a vehicle replacement fund. We've also, in addition to the money we've talked about, also maintain about $10 to $11 million in a separate fund that is specifically there for that purpose, to make sure that we can continue to provide uninterrupted services without impacting these reserves that are here as a rainy day fund, to continue to have that level of service no matter what happens.
All right. So we've talked about general fund reserve. We've talked about budget and budgeting and our current budget cycle and how we walk through a budget. We've talked about recession proofing our budget, placing ourselves in a good position that when there is a downturn, we can handle that because of some of the things that we put into place over a long period of time, some of the philosophies and ideologies in terms of approach. We've talked about where the majority of our revenue comes from, which is from sales tax. That's 50, I think it's exactly 52, according to this spreadsheet, which, by the way, was provided by my good friends here. But we have some other revenues, too. So let's quickly talk about those and how reliable those are. So we got state shared revenues, we got permits and fees, and other. So let's state shared revenues. How reliable are state shared revenues?
State shared revenues, Terry, actually have been quite reliable. The same as everything else, as the economy grows, and as the economy grows for everybody, those revenues also grow. Those revenues, if we were to look at 10 years ago, let's actually go back to 2015, those revenues were about $9 million for us at the time. 10 years later, last year in 2025, they had grown to about $24 million.
Wow.
So just as we grow, so does the state.
Yeah.
And we get a share of those revenues. A lot of it has to do with our population growth in Marana. We get a proportionate share.
Right.
Of that population.
So that the population contributes to the increase in monies coming to us in a number of ways, not just from state shared revenues, but when people move into our community, right, they end up buying goods and services, which in turn are taxed, which in turns, comes to the town in the form of sales tax, right?
Correct.
Okay, good.
And continuing on, it's not just our state shared revenues, but as we have our residents go to our businesses, and we're lucky to have the mall. We're lucky to have people coming from outside of Marana, not just our residents shopping in Marana. We also see our city sales tax grow. And in a similar fashion, those city sales taxes have grown and pretty much doubled in that same 10-year period. As we look at the breakdown of the different revenues that we get, those sales taxes and those state shared revenues, they make up about, at any time, 80% or more of our total general fund monies. And that is huge. That is a lot. I know we say that.
Is that unstable? Is that unhealthy? Is that foolish to put all of our hopes and dreams into these two pockets of money?
Not so much. What I think a lot of times people look at, because we are growing very fast, a lot of times people think that development is driving our revenues and we get a lot of money from developers. And we really don't. We get maybe about 10% or less coming in as revenues from development that funds the general fund.
And that comes from permits and fees and things of that nature related to development.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. A lot of what we see when people are building, when people are clearing out the desert and they're putting up homes or they're putting up businesses, that's that 10%. But at the end of the day, it's our residents. It's the people that live here, that live around us. Those are the driving force of the economy. And what we end up doing is we end up collecting those sales taxes, those revenues, and we end up giving it back to the community. And we end up giving it back in the form that was mentioned earlier. We have our highways and streets. We have our public safety. We have our courts. We have our animal control. We have our parks. What we don't have that is paid through other taxes is our fire service. That is a special district. That's a separate district. What we also don't have is the school districts. Those are also paid through other types of revenues, which would be property taxes, secondary property taxes. So we can,
Okay, I'm going to jump in here on you, Yanni, because I want to make sure that our residents don't get confused. So when you talk about property tax, the schools are covered by a property tax. The fire district is covered by a property tax. But that property tax is a property tax for them. It's not a property tax that Marana has that we take in and then pay for those services. It's completely separate. MUSD has their own board. The school district, the fire district, they have their own boards, right? And they have their own source of revenue that comes via a property tax. The town of Marana doesn't have a property tax that we collect that comes to us that we use to supply goods and services. Is that a fair, accurate statement?
that is correct.
Okay.
The town of Marana itself has no property tax.
Okay. So when people say, you do have a property tax, I pay a property tax every year. What are they paying property tax to?
The people are paying property tax for county services.
Pima
property
County,
tax,
it's Pima County property tax.
There's also
Flood district.
There's the flood district. There's a number of other special districts and taxing districts that exist. Some of them might be community facility districts that exist throughout the state, and we have a few here in Marana. And as you mentioned, we have the school board, so those are districts. We have Pima Community College.
Right.
That also has its property tax.
Okay.
We have the fire district. So there is a variety of districts and special taxes that have accumulated over the years, and they're all added onto all of our tax bills.
Okay. Very good. All right. Any other sources of revenue? We got other here, which is probably grants. Erik, something you want to cover?
No, I think as far as you had asked a question earlier, it's kind of, how thoughtful or how foolish could it be to have, a reliance on certain types or certain revenue streams being like, let's say, sales tax or state shared revenues. And I think a way to look at it is, council, basically when the town was incorporated back in 1977, they made a commitment to not have a property tax. And in fact, as you just mentioned, we don't have a property tax even to this day. So what that means in our particular case is we want to be thoughtful in our budgetary practices and fiscally responsible to be able to maintain the levels of service that the community needs and to be able to weather those storms. And, diversification of revenues, related to revenues that are not as economically sensitive are property taxes. That is a lever that some cities and towns utilize, but it's not one that the town has. And in part, it hasn't had to because of what we've been talking about thus far today, and that being, thoughtful and intentional in our budgetary practices to being reasonable and realistic and meeting those obligations.
Good.
And what helps with that is not just the budget process. That is the start, and you have to have a good plan in place. What really pays off in the end is that every department lives within that budget. They actually follow the budget, and they do everything they can not to overspend. And that, in the end, that execution is what has kept us healthy and has kept us on course.
Yeah, that's a great point, because every year we set a budget and we estimate what it is we anticipate will come into the town via sales tax, state shared revenues, permits and fees, and other. We estimate that, and we operate our budget off of that number. Now, consistently, our numbers have actually come in significantly higher than what we budgeted. right?
That's
so
correct.
In the case of, let's say, just last year. So we set a budget, and let's look at fiscal year 25, the most complete year. So there, our revenue budgeted was 80.7, and we came in 95.5. So we came in higher than what we projected. So what do we do with that extra 14.9 million dollars that goes in the general fund reserve?
That amount will get reinvested into future one-time projects into the future. It becomes part of our available savings beyond and above the rainy day fund, beyond our target reserve, and then it gets put back into the community.
Into the community in the form of projects. Let's say Barnett Linear Park and Barnett Linear Channel. Let's talk about Tangerine Farms Road Extension. Those are the types of things that we can and are planning to use those monies for. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, and that is what we do. We get back into the budget process, because what we end up doing is we take those numbers, we go back into council, we go back into the conversations of what's going to be funded with this money that we didn't spend during the year or was because of additional funding that we received that we didn't anticipate.
All right. Erik, if somebody wants to know more about the budget process, the budget cycle, the numbers, the ins and outs, what's your best advice there? Is any place they can go, things they can do to help educate themselves?
Yeah, the listeners can go to, probably the easiest place to start is going to be our webpage. So our finance team has put together a well-developed and thought out and quite a bit of detail on the overall budget process and practices, as well as on the financial information, and they can go there. And in fact, on a number of the questions that we hear from the community, we have like an FAQ, frequently asked questions, and when is the budget process, or what is it, when is it, what are revenue types? They can go to our website, and if there's a question there that they have that isn't answered, they can even submit a question there. So I think it could start there, as well as just being set up to being notified for, when the budget process starts, and we welcome, their input during the process.
And at the end of the day, we recognize that this is a process. We recognize that it's a lot of information. Mm-hmm. So we always welcome phone calls. We have fielded phone calls in the past. We've had people who have called and said, how does this work? And we're happy to answer that. We're happy to take those calls and work through any questions that anybody has.
That's what a good public servant does right there. Thank you, Yiannis. Appreciate it. All right. So we've talked about a lot, and we've covered things pretty much at a 30,000-foot level, I would say. And that's because getting into detail, this would be like a 3-hour podcast, and you'd all be sleeping by now. But with that in mind, is there anything else before we close this thing out that you think our listeners need to know about, or anything you want to convey before we close out the show? Yiannis thinking.
I think it's important to know that we look at ourselves as public servants. We look at ourselves as fiduciaries of your money, because what we're spending here, what the town spends, is your money. And we take that very seriously. We go into a room every day and we try to do the best we possibly can to ensure that services will be delivered, those will be uninterrupted, and we can make sure that as everybody lives their lives, if we do what we do correctly, you're not going to have to think about anything other than how to enjoy the park that you go to on a well-paved road that is safe, because our police officers are there smiling and waving at you. Well, most everybody, because for those that speed, they might be doing a little bit more than smiling and waving. But yes, at the end of the day, I have to say that I am very proud to work for the Town of Marana and for the values and the quality of life that it provides to everybody.
All right. Erik, anything closing from you?
Only, the budgetary process is just allocating, the revenues that are anticipated to be able to provide those services that council and the citizens require.
Outstanding. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Really a great job on a complex topic, right? Budgeting and stuff, finance, numbers, all of that stuff. It's difficult to talk about it in a way that everybody clearly gets and understands, but you both did an amazing job. So thank you so much for that. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. Until next time. Submit your questions by visiting maranaaz.gov/realtalk. and we'll answer them right here. To receive notifications for new releases, remember to hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Also, remember to follow the town on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram to stay up to date on current news and events.